Right. That means I can introduce Dr. Sophie Lund Rasmussen. Apologize, Sophie, for that. Who is our also known as Dr. Hedgehog, which perhaps I should have just said, and that would have been much easier. But it's fantastic that you are here. She's an expert in European hedgehogs and a research fellow at the Linacre College and the Wildlife Conservation Unit, or it is brilliantly known as WildCRU, at the University of Oxford. So I'm going to pass over to Sophie to tell us more about hedgehogs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to participate in this really important symposium. So I'm really glad I got the chance to talk about hedgehogs, which of course is my favorite subject. So the situation is that the European hedgehog is in decline, and we have to do something about this. And on the 28th of October 2024, something really important happened because the red list, IUCN red list for the European hedgehog for all of Europe was updated. And it changed status from least concern, meaning that we shouldn't bother, we shouldn't worry, to near threatened. I was one of the two experts asked to write the assessment report leading to this status change. And I think this is going to really matter. In the UK, on the national red list, the hedgehog has been listed as vulnerable since 2020, with an up to 66% decline since the year 2000 in the UK. But if you look at the rural areas, it may be up to even 75%, depending on who you ask and how they estimate this. On other national red lists, the hedgehog is listed as endangered or near threatened as well. European hedgehogs live close to humans, and a variety of human actions seem to be contributing to this worrying decline we see in the hedgehogs in Europe. But there's also another issue, because the increased focus post the COVID-19 pandemic on zoonosis and One Health and the potential spread of diseases from wildlife to humans may also lead to conservation issues for hedgehogs. So why are the hedgehogs disappearing? Well, they're losing habitat. Climate change may also affect the hedgehog's survival, but we need more research into this. The intensified agricultural practices with loss of habitats because the hedgerows were disappearing, the heavy machinery being used, the monocultures created by growing large fields of only one crop, the pesticide use is causing the insects and slugs to disappear, and these are the food items of the hedgehogs. And then the hedgehogs can also be exposed to secondary poisoning and primary poisoning by eating all the different pesticides or eating the species targeted by these different pesticides. And also, of course, the large fields with monocultures is not exactly attracting biodiversity, which means there are less food items for the hedgehogs to find. Traffic is a major issue as well. It's estimated that up to 1 out of 3 hedgehogs are killed on roads each year. And due to the habitat loss, we see the hedgehogs are nowadays increasingly seeking areas of human occupation. So actually the battle to save the declining hedgehogs will take place in our own backyards. And this is why today's symposium is really important for hedgehog conservation, because we need less of these kinds of gardens and more of these types of gardens. There are many different threats to hedgehogs. There are the natural predators, of course, the badgers, the foxes, and some of the larger owls, the pesticides, as we mentioned, but also a lot of different garden accidents can happen, and I'll get back to that. But there's also an issue of, for example, aggressive dogs. We do see a lot of hedgehogs injured by dog bites, so this is also something to be aware of. So just to introduce me, what I do, I've been working with the hedgehog research for the past 13 years now, full-time, completely dedicated. I've actually dedicated my life to saving the hedgehogs through research and communication of this research. I work closely with hedgehog rehabilitators, veterinary staff treating hedgehogs, NGO promoting hedgehog conservation, as well as the industry. So I'm actually collaborating with, for example, the robotic lawnmower manufacturers to produce more hedgehog-friendly robotic lawnmowers. I host an international conference for hedgehog professionals, ranging from hedgehog rehabilitators, veterinary staff, NGOs, and so on, to network and share knowledge and inspire best practice. I do a lot of citizen science projects where I engage the public in helping with my research and science communication. My very multifaceted research is focused on detecting what is causing the decline we see in the hedgehogs and what we can do to prevent it. And I'm informing hedgehog conservation through the research-based optimization and also advice within hedgehog rehabilitation, legislation, political influence, conservation plans and initiative, and specific challenges to hedgehog survival. I'm currently involved in around 22 research projects on hedgehog ecology and conservation, and I'm going to list a few just to give you an impression. I run the Danish Hedgehog Project, which is basically using dead hedgehogs to understand the living. I'm measuring stress hormones in wild and rehabilitated hedgehogs to monitor how they're doing in captivity and how we can minimize the stress levels of hedgehogs that are in care. I study the microbiomes, the bacteria and viruses of the hedgehogs to optimize the treatment of sick hedgehogs, but also to prevent zoonotic disease transfers and to inform authorities about One Health concerns. I study hedgehog diet through eDNA analysis of hedgehog poo. You can use hedgehog poo for a lot of research. I love poo. I study robotic lawnmowers. I'm making interactive 3D models of hedgehogs. I'm measuring hedgehog hearing for the first time to try and make sound repelling devices for cars and robotic lawnmowers, if it's possible. I'm also creating, together with colleagues, an international hedgehog database, which will also be used as a daily record-keeping system for the hedgehog rehabilitators. I study pesticides or ecotoxicology in the hedgehogs and the ecology of wild and rehabilitated hedgehogs living in the suburbs to really understand the threats they're facing and what we can do to optimize our gardens as habitats for hedgehogs. So I'm going to tell you about the situation with pesticides in hedgehogs. I recently published this paper with my colleagues about pesticides in the population of European hedgehogs in Denmark. All my publications are available open access, which means that everyone can download them for free. So I'll get back to that, but you can visit my website and find all the links. So the background for this research on pesticides is that the exposure to potentially toxic chemicals in hedgehogs could be a contributing factor to this decline we see, either due to the reduction of food items through insecticide use, for example. If we kill the slugs and snails and insects the hedgehogs are eating, there'll be no food for the hedgehogs. But also poisoning due to either primary poisoning where they eat the poison directly, or secondary poisoning where they would eat a rat or a mouse, for example, because they do scavenge, which have been killed by rodenticides. But there could also be non-acute toxic health consequences for the hedgehogs, because what happens if all these pesticides start to accumulate in their systems? We're only starting to understand the consequences of this. I think that the European hedgehogs are excellent model species for the exposure to xenobiotics, which means basically any chemical substance that is foreign to animal life. Because the hedgehogs share habitats with humans, so we can measure whether we are exposed to the same chemicals, perhaps, when we share the garden habitat. They eat slugs and snails and insects that are targeted with pesticides, and they eat carrion like poisoned mice and rats. They can eat the poison directly, but they also eat insects that feed on plants which could have been treated with herbicides, for example. And they travel through fields and gardens and come into close physical contacts with the plants that have been treated with herbicides and insecticides. So perhaps they can actually just accumulate all the different pesticides in the habitat as well, unintentionally. What I used for this study was a lot of dead hedgehogs collected by members of the public from all over Denmark. Each red dot is a dead hedgehog used for my research. Over 400 volunteers scraped off dead hedgehogs from the roads and transported it to them to collection stations all over Denmark. There was a huge support for this, and I have a wonderful data set now of dead hedgehogs and their organs, which I can use for my research. So we could afford to test 115 liver samples from the dead hedgehogs. And we tried to choose the most commonly used pesticides in Denmark. And we chose 7 different rodenticides and 4 insecticides and 8 herbicides. We used a very advanced machine that would perform liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry. And I invited experts to know about this because I absolutely have no idea how to use this machine, but my colleagues did. So these are the rodenticides we tested, and the herbicides and the different insecticides. Unfortunately, we couldn't test for Roundup, glyphosate, because it would require a completely different method. So this was omitted from the analysis. But glyphosate is also very commonly used in Denmark. What we found that out of these 115 liver samples of hedgehogs, representing hedgehogs from all over Denmark, in all different age classes and sexes and causes of death. Some had been run over by cars, some had been found dead in gardens, like dying naturally, and some had died in care. In 84% of these individuals, we found rodenticides. We found insecticides in 43% of the samples and herbicides in half of them. And please keep in mind that we only tested 19 different substances. We didn't test all the different pesticides available on the market. The most frequently detected insecticide was imidacloprid, and for the herbicides it was metamitrone, and bromadiolone was the most commonly detected rodenticide. We didn't really find any fipronil in the samples, but this could be due to the method. When we tested the occurrence of pesticides and pesticide accumulation in the different hedgehogs, we could tell that it wasn't affected by sex or age, habitat type, because we also recorded where these dead hedgehogs came from. So we could divide them into urban and rural habitat types, for example. We also knew whether they were carrying MRSA and endoparasites and so on, because I've used these dead hedgehogs for a lot of different research projects. But when we tested for the effects of this, we found that the presence of pesticides was just a general thing. So this could indicate that there is just an extensive exposure to pesticides throughout the hedgehog population in Denmark. 9 out of 10 samples we tested contained 1 or more of the 19 pesticides. This is hugely worrying, and it's a very comprehensive study, and it's a subject that we really need to dig into, because it is extremely worrying to see that the hedgehogs, which are surrounding us, we share the habitats with the hedgehogs, are so exposed to pesticides. I'm also studying hedgehogs and robotic lawnmowers. And this is a really good example of identifying specific challenges for hedgehogs and solving the problem. Because Robotic lawnmowers are very popular, especially in mainland Europe. They're only coming to the UK now, I know, but in Denmark, it's estimated that up to 1 out of 4 gardens actually has a robotic lawnmower. My research has shown that some of the models of robotic lawnmowers can be harmful to hedgehogs. They just don't detect them, and then they end up running them over and sometimes cutting them to pieces. This is why I've started a project where I collaborate with the industry on this research project to inform and facilitate hedgehog-friendly robotic lawnmowers. We've even designed a hedgehog crash test dummy to use in our safety tests to represent reality, so we didn't have to use dead hedgehogs all the time for the research. We are also preparing a safety standard test for hedgehog friendliness and a labeling system for the products, so that within a few years, the consumer will actually be able to decide whether to buy a hedgehog-friendly robotic lawnmower or not, because the friendly ones would have like a massive stamp on them saying that they are hedgehog-friendly. The University of Oxford has produced an impact film explaining about my work, and I would like to show you this. If it's not working properly, there will be a link to this video in the chat as well, so you can watch it later on. But here you go.
Whatever she does at 100 miles an hour.
I think the kind of work that Sophie is doing is really exciting.
How can you have more knowledge than Dr. Hedgehog?
Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Dr. Sophie Lund Rasmussen, or Dr. Hedgehog. It's one of the few species of wildlife that we can actually get really close to, because their strategy when faced with danger is to stand completely still. But of course, a species that wouldn't move away from machines could be in danger. From around 2016, stories started showing up in the media in mainland Europe, claiming that robotic lawnmowers were very dangerous to hedgehogs. But it was completely anecdotal. Nobody had actually studied this. So I decided to spend my summer holiday to investigate the effects of these robotic lawnmowers on hedgehogs. And this goes to show how important this work is, because obviously these injuries can be lethal to the hedgehogs.
They live amongst us. They are vulnerable to problems that we cause for them, really. They've declined massively by up to 75% in rural areas just since the turn of the century. I mean, if we use these as an example, that's these 3 gone, and there's this one left. So we really do need to do all we can to help them.
I basically got in touch with the manufacturers. I was really positively surprised to find that Husqvarna and Stihl were generally interested.
The 30 years of robotic lawnmower development is the main part for me when talking about Husqvarna.
We are aware that additional research and engineering is needed.
People know about the University of Oxford. They respect the research being produced here.
This is exactly what we wanted to have in this area, because we need a methodology to actually identify how to test our products.
We do a lot of tests with hedgehog crash test dummies, which we have developed especially for the purpose. And we wanted a dummy that really represented reality, because obviously we cannot test on live hedgehogs. And also to develop a standardized safety test, because that would allow us to provide sort of hedgehog-friendly stamps to guide the consumers into buying hedgehog-friendly robotic lawnmowers in the future.
I'm a computer engineer from the background here, so we have 2 different ways of going to it. Together, we create a bigger picture, better picture of the situation overall.
After the first intense talks to Sophie about her work, we have put together a team of engineers and started to transfer her major findings into our engineering project.
It's a great opportunity to collaborate with the industry, because we're working towards the same goal.
The small critters out there in our gardens, they create a lot of feelings. We, of course, as humans, don't want to hurt them. We want them in our gardens. We, for example, have a feature where you can make sure that the mower is not going out during dusk and dawn.
So preventing nighttime operation of your robotic mower is the first layer of safety.
And also we have the biodiversity zone that we are enabling now also for some of our products, that you can define areas in your garden that are not being cut. This year, we launched our first products with radars.
So this particular model of robotic lawnmower is a very new product, and we recently tested it. And for the first time, we actually experienced that a robotic lawnmower detected the hedgehog at a distance and changed directions. And that was the perfect scenario. This is what we've been working towards, and we're really reaching that step now, and it makes me so happy.
Moreover, we offered to be part of the industry partner team supporting Sophie's work in order to establish a basis for a new safety standard for hedgehogs.
For my point of view, it's very hard to get to that point without the help from Sophie.
Shouldn't we make a difference and try to protect these hedgehogs in our lives so that our grandchildren can get this wonderful nature experience, you know, meeting a hedgehog in the garden at night, getting really close to it, being able to see this really mysterious and fascinating creature. Excellent. So this was a great promo video. I hope you enjoyed it, but I think it really explains the work I do with the robotic lawnmowers. So then I wanted to briefly go through what a hedgehog-friendly garden is like. So I run a national conservation campaign called Denmark's Hedgehogs in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund in Denmark. And we've produced this really informative sheet, but that's in Danish, so we can't really use that. I have a YouTube channel called Dr Hedgehog, and I've actually made videos about how to make your garden hedgehog friendly. So you can go and have a look at them afterwards if you feel like it. Alternatively, you can visit the British Hedgehog Preservation Society's webpage, where they have some really informative leaflets about creating a wildlife garden, gardening with hedgehogs, how to make hedgehog homes, and so on. So I can really recommend that as well as a research source. But the major points about hedgehog-friendly gardens are that they need free passage in and out of the garden in search for food and mates. And in the UK, you're really fond of like massive tall fences that wouldn't allow the hedgehogs to roam around freely. So if they can even enter your garden, then they would have to walk even longer distance in their search for food and mates and good nest sites, because they just can't enter freely. So it's really important to make sure that your hedgehog haven is actually accessible to the hedgehogs. Some people say that they can't cut a hole in their fence because then their dogs will run out. And I have the same issue at home, which is why I've created this very ugly tubing system you can see on the right, which allows the hedgehogs to actually enter my garden, but keeps my very small dog inside the fence. So there are no excuses. You can actually adapt this even though you have a dog in your garden. Then we need to provide good nest sites for the hedgehogs, because obviously they need places to nest. And if you don't have like a wild garden with all sorts of massive like bushes and hedges under which the hedgehogs can nest, you can provide different alternatives like piles of garden waste, or even build hedgehog houses or buy them. I've also made this pallet frame bed for flowers here. It's very it's down in the corner. It's very popular in Denmark. I don't know if you have that a lot in the UK, but I've actually made sure the hedgehogs can nest in the bottom. So and then I've filled the frame up with soil, and then I've planted plants on the top. So this would allow you to still have a nice and decent garden and still provide a nest site for the hedgehogs. So we need to let our gardens grow wild to attract biodiversity. We need natural food items, which means that a garden like this, which is inaccessible to the hedgehogs, only have short grass. It might even not be real grass. and tiles, well, it doesn't provide a good hedgehog habitat. We need more of this. We need free access into the garden. We need a lot of biodiversity and good nest sites. If you sow wildflower seeds, please be aware that this should be native species because the interactions between the insects and the plants are very specific. So if you sow species that are not really applicable to the UK insects, it's not really helping a lot. So it's also important to avoid garden accidents. So please, for example, check for hedgehogs resting under hedges and in compost heaps before you start the garden work. A lot of hedgehogs are injured by strimmers and shovels each year because they obviously sleep during the day when we're doing the gardening work. And we might even start our springtime gardening cleaning when the hedgehogs are still hibernating. Please check for hedgehogs in piles of garden waste because these piles of garden waste are perfect nest sites before you shed the garden waste. I've had hedgehogs with radio tags which are followed in the urban gardens, and they've been shedded in these machines because they were resting in a pile of garden waste that was just being lifted up and put into one of these machines. If you build a bonfire, which is, of course, also a perfect nest site for the hedgehogs, then please build it on the day or move it and rebuild it before lighting it, because otherwise you'll end up with a burnt hedgehog like this poor little fellow, or a dead burnt hedgehog. Please only let your robotic lawnmower run during the day where the hedgehogs are less likely to be active, and buy a hedgehog-friendly model. So far, we haven't produced any official lists, but if you have a look at my publications, you can definitely tell which machines performed the best in our tests. If your dog is aggressive towards hedgehogs, then please put it on a leash at night, because we do see so many injuries caused by dog bites. The oldest documented hedgehog in the world, called Torvald, which we found during the Danish Hedgehog project, he was actually killed by a dog attack. He lived for 16 years. We counted the growth rings of his jaw, and we could tell that he reached 16 years of age until a dog attacked him and killed him through infections of the wounds. What a waste, a perfect life that could have been saved if this person had kept his or her dog on a leash. Hedgehogs get themselves into all sorts of trouble, especially in the gardens. So please make sure to avoid all these garden incidents. They're excellent swimmers, but they will drown in pools and ponds if they cannot get up again. So we need to provide escape ramps of some sort, and there are plenty of different advices on the internet. So please go and look them up if you want to make sure they don't drown. And please cover holes and provide escape ramps, for example, from in-ground trampolines, where the hedgehogs can fall into the holes underneath the trampolines. And if the edges are too steep, they just can't get up again. So I've heard about a garden where when they removed the trampoline, they found 8 dead hedgehogs underneath the trampoline. So it is actually an issue, and it's probably an issue because the hedgehogs tend to rely on their hearing and their sense of smell, and they don't have a very good eyesight. So I suspect that they just don't see the holes in front of them at night. So remove and lift any netting you have in the garden because they get entangled, or check the netting daily. Get rid of waste, which they can also get entangled into and get horrible wounds that may become infected and kill them. Please don't use pesticides, as I described earlier. This is an example of a hedgehog lying dead inside a rodenticide box because this was a juvenile and he could actually poke his head into the rodenticide box and eat the poison directly. Please provide fresh water and, if necessary, supplementary feeding. That would be cat food for the hedgehogs, but attracting natural food items is the ideal way to go. So get the biodiversity going in your garden to attract the natural food items for the hedgehogs. And if you're feeding and watering the hedgehogs, please keep a strict hygiene and consider having several feeding stations so they don't get aggressive towards each other when feeding. So make your garden hedgehog friendly is one way to help spread the important message of hedgehog friendly gardens. You can volunteer at a wildlife rehabilitation center. You can help sample for research, participate in fieldwork. You can support the British Hedgehog Preservation Society or your local hedgehog rescue. You can map your hedgehogs and your hedgehog highway, the hole in your garden, on the big hedgehog map. You can also participate in the National Hedgehog Monitoring Program by checking all the pictures this collates and host a monitoring location. And you can read more about it and sign up here. I recently edited a book about hedgehog research if you're interested in learning more. It's available open access for free as a PDF file, and it also contains a review of hedgehog toxicology research being produced so far if you're more interested in pesticides and other chemicals in the hedgehogs, accumulating in the hedgehogs. I would like to acknowledge all my collaborators in my research and all the assistants and helpers and all the funding and facilities that make my research become reality, make me do the research. And if you want to follow my research, you can follow it on many different platforms. I do have a website called drhedgehog.org where you can find all my publications, read about the different projects and updates on it, anything I do. I also have this YouTube channel called Dr. Hedgehog where you can see videos on creating a hedgehog-friendly garden. And thank you so much for your attention.